I have spent my life studying the natural world, its patterns, its limits, and the forces that shape life on Earth. Alongside biology and ecology, I have also pursued the study of creatures that exist at the edge of human awareness. Over the last 3 years, those interests came together through years of research, fundraising, and preparation for an intercontinental expedition. This documentary is the result of that work. A catalog of first-hand encounters, recorded observations, and corroborated historical accounts of species officially recognized yet rarely witnessed. My travels began in the Florida Everglades. This vast wetland is one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. Warm, shallow water, dense vegetation, and an abundance of prey create ideal conditions for large adaptable predators. Among them is one of the most widespread and most misunderstood species I have encountered during my expedition, Craniosaurus vorax, known more commonly as the skull lizard. In the Everglades, adult skull lizards commonly reach 3 to 4 meters in length, with some individuals exceeding 600 kilograms. While the species evolved primarily as a terrestrial predator, it has adapted remarkably well to marshes and shallow waterways. Powerful forelimbs and a muscular tail allow it to navigate the wetlands with ease, while heat-sensitive pits along the skull enable it to detect prey hidden within dense reeds. To better observe this species in its natural habitat, I traveled by airboat deep into the interior wetlands, following narrow channels inaccessible by foot. It was there, along a flooded tree line, that I witnessed a fully grown individual, approximately 3 meters in length, standing over a freshly killed white-tailed deer. The carcass lay partially submerged, and the skull lizard positioned itself between the kill and several smaller skull lizards that lingered just beyond striking distance. Each time one approached too closely, the larger animal would snap its jaws at them, letting out a low hissing sound in warning. Skull lizards are an apex predator here, consuming a wide variety of prey: mammals, fish, invasive reptiles, and even smaller alligators. Juveniles, however, face a far harsher reality. Burmese pythons, large birds, and adult alligators claim the majority before they ever reach maturity. Adults, by contrast, face virtually no natural predators, with one notable exception: Tricranus tempest, the three-headed storm wyvern. This is without question the largest flying animal ever known to exist. The largest recorded individuals possess wingspans approaching 100 meters, dwarfing every pterosaur and bird that came before them. Storm wyverns are solitary migrants, capable of traveling immense distances between feeding grounds. Some individuals make brief seasonal stops here in the Everglades, drawn by the extraordinary concentration of biomass. Fish, birds, large reptiles, and yes, even Craniosaurus, fall within their potential prey range. When present, the storm wyvern often wade into shallow swamps and remain motionless for extended periods of time. Each of its 3 heads monitor a different part of the environment, allowing it to detect movement across water, shorelines, and sky simultaneously. The storm wyvern has also been observed discharging powerful electrical currents into shallow water, killing large numbers of fish at once. I witnessed this behavior firsthand during one afternoon survey while traveling by airboat through the open marsh. Ahead of me, the water suddenly erupted, fish floating to the surface in violent spasms. Moments later, as I turned around the bend of trees, I saw the source: a juvenile Tricranus tempest. Even at this younger age, the animal possessed a wingspan of nearly 12 meters and stood at least twice my height. It strode through the water with surprising grace, its heads lowered and turned to seize stunned fish, swallowing them whole. For even a fully grown Craniosaurus, an encounter with a storm wyvern presents a fatal risk. Both species possess wide geographic ranges, and their presence in Florida represents only a fraction of their broader ecological story. As my journey continued across the globe, I would encounter both of these species again, under very different conditions, shaped by new landscapes and new competition. Brazil has always been a land of extremes, where dense forest and winding rivers conceal some of the most extraordinary predators on the planet. Before entering the jungle, it's worth understanding the history behind the 3 apex species we will be seeking out on our journey. Caudophyrum pyrobladius, or the fireblade lizard, is primarily known from Chile, where it has long been regarded as a symbol of strength and authority, even appearing on the nation's coat of arms. One of the most well-known historical accounts involves Simón Bolívar, or as he was known during his campaigns across northern South America as El Libertador. According to contemporary records and regional accounts, Bolívar was gifted a single egg recovered from a nest in northern Chile. The animal that hatched belonged to none other than a pyrobladius. Bolívar named it Carmesi. Carmesi accompanied Bolívar through multiple campaigns, earning a reputation for its vigilance, surprising loyalty, and effectiveness in combat. In 1821, during a battle, the animal disappeared and was presumed dead. No remains were ever recovered, leaving behind only accounts of its presence and the strength it inspired. Noctivorax rubiferum, more commonly known as the night bleeder, has haunted these jungles for millennia. The name comes from both its strictly nocturnal behavior and its feeding strategy. After killing its prey, the animal is known to drain the body of blood, much like the native vampire bats of the region. Unlike them, however, the night bleeder feeds not for sustenance alone, but for iron. Its body concentrates the metal from its victim's blood into its elongated, heavily reinforced claws, each reaching nearly a foot in length. Early Spanish explorers recorded accounts of men being taken one by one along the forest edge after nightfall. Lanterns would flicker, a voice would vanish, and by morning there would be no trace. Indigenous communities, by contrast, learned how to live alongside the predator. Travel at night was avoided entirely, and fires were kept burning at all times, taking advantage of the night bleeder's extreme aversion to open flame. And the final predator we are searching for here is Testudo hydroferox, or the giant marksman turtle. Portuguese settlers navigating the Amazon in the 17th century wrote of enormous turtles with armored shells and strange openings along their backs. Fishermen claim these turtles could blast jets of water with such force that they could knock a man right off his feet. In more recent years, Testudo hydroferox has drawn concern from conservationists for its role in the exotic pet trade. As hatchlings, they can easily fit in the palm of a hand, making them seem like perfect pets, and their pressurized water jets and curious behavior only add to their appeal. However, within just a few years, these turtles grow to sizes far beyond what most private keepers can handle, forcing many owners to hand them over to zoos and reptile rehoming and rehabilitation centers, and in some cases, individuals are even released into non-native waterways. This raises serious concern about the potential establishment of feral hydroferox populations mirroring the ecological issues caused by other introduced reptiles. With these stories in mind, I set out into the Amazon alongside my guide, a man who had spent decades navigating this labyrinth of rivers, swamps, and dense forest. We traveled for hours, moving cautiously through the undergrowth, listening to the calls of howler monkeys overhead, the rustle of caimans in the shallows, and the occasional splash of a capybara slipping into the water. By late afternoon, we had covered several kilometers of winding waterways, our eyes scanning constantly for movement. The humidity pressed down, and the air was alive with the scent of wet earth and vegetation. Birds took flight at our approach, and schools of fish stirred near the riverbank. Every so often the guide would pause, pointing to subtle ripples in the water. As evening approached, the Amazon River widened and the water was still. That's when movement caught our eyes, a massive hydroferox gliding silently below the surface, only its head and armored shell breaking the water. The twin openings along its back were poised like artillery. I watched in awe as its enormous, highly specialized eyes scanned the surrounding vegetation. When it turned towards the overhanging branches, twin jets of water shot out, sending a startled howler monkey plunging into the river. The hydroferox propelled itself forward with a sudden burst of speed, its powerful legs driving it through the water, while its massive shell cut a path across the river. And then as suddenly as it had struck, it and the howler monkey disappeared beneath the water. After documenting the hydroferox, we spent days trekking inland towards the Cerrado savanna. Here the fireblade lizard and the night bleeder could be found, where they both hunt tapirs, capybara, and giant anteaters, competing with jaguars and each other for prey. My guide assured me that we would find pyrobladius here, as they frequent open areas and often engage in quite flashy displays with their blade-like tails erupting into burning and smoking chemicals their tails produce. The night bleeder, however, he made no promises we would encounter, and if I'm being honest, I don't think he wanted to find one. A great deal of fear and reverence is given to the night bleeders here by locals, and given their stealthy and nocturnal nature, they are quite hard to find. My guide told me a saying the indigenous people have: if the night bleeder doesn't want you to see it, you won't. And if it does, pray that it won't be the last thing you see. Arriving at our destination, we spent several days patrolling the savanna and forest edges, where these species are said to most commonly frequent. We found signs of both during this time: pyrobladius scrapes and scorch marks on stones from it grinding its tail blade on them. And in the forest, we even found meter-long slash marks on trees, marking the territory of a night bleeder. On the fourth day of searching, as the sun began to set over the savanna, we finally spotted a pyrobladius moving through the grass. It was crouching low, stalking a tapir just beginning its evening feeding. I couldn't believe my eyes as I took out my camera to document this hunt. It burst forward with surprising speed, swinging its tail and cleaving the tapir's neck with lethal precision. As it began to feed, it paused, and raised its nose to the forest, scanning the edge carefully as if it knew something was there. Then from the shadows, movement caught my attention. I could hardly believe it. A night bleeder emerged, seemingly materializing from the shadows. Its blood-red claws glinted in the setting sunlight, and it hissed, circling the pyrobladius. The fireblade lizard hunched over its kill, always turning to face its foe. It rattled its tail, emitting a sizzling chemical smoke, and causing the blade to start to glow red-hot. The night bleeder hesitated, sniffing the air, and its eyes locked onto the glowing red tail. It seemed to realize this fight wasn't worth it, and it slowly backed away, disappearing silently into the forest. Just as I began to recover from that encounter, a shadow blotted out the setting sun. What happened next, I can still hardly believe. The sound of massive wing beats filled the air. An adult storm wyvern descended, landing in the clearing with wings that swept the grass aside. One of its 3 enormous heads sprayed electrically charged saliva across the ground, forcing the Pyrobladius to retreat into the trees. The storm wyvern seized the tapir, 2 of the heads ripping it in half, before swallowing the chunks. After this, we watched as it laid down in the clearing, tucking its heads beneath a wing as it rested for the night. In our time in Brazil, we had witnessed 4 apex predators: the Hydropharax's precision in the river, the Pyrobladius's lethality on the savanna, the Noctivorax's stealth and cunning, and the overwhelming power of a storm wyvern. These encounters revealed the extraordinary adaptations of each species and the delicate balance between predator and prey across Brazil's forest and grasslands. Leaving the dense forest and sprawling rivers of South America, journey carried us across the Atlantic to Africa. Our destination was the lower edges of the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa. Jagged cliffs rise sharply above the savanna, creating a dramatic meeting of rock and grassland. Here the air is thick with heat during the day and crisp in the evenings, carrying the scent of dry grass, dust, and distant smoke from brush fires. These mountains, along with the foothills and savannas at their base, harbor some of the world's most formidable predators. Among the crags and ledges of these mountains, Ignitorus draconiformes, or the African fire dragon, breeds and raises its young. These living pterosaurs construct nests hidden among jagged outcrops, out of reach of almost any predator. Hatchlings spend months learning to stretch and flap their wings, sheltered from the storms that sweep the cliffs. Once able to fly, fire dragons launch themselves from these heights, descending into the lowlands in search of prey. As I set out with a guide in a jeep across the wilderness to reach the Drakensberg Mountains, I thought back to an old African folktale I had heard. It told of a boy who had discovered a lone fire dragon egg, abandoned in a cliffside crevice. Feeling a mix of curiosity and sympathy, he took the egg home and cared for it, feeding the hatchling, playing with it, and even helping it learn to fly. The village elders warned him repeatedly. These were wild creatures, not companions, and attempting to raise one would bring nothing but ruin. The boy, enchanted by the dragon's intelligence and beauty, paid no heed to them. For months, the creature grew under his care, its wings stretching wider, its firepower stronger. He marveled at its strength, forgetting the elders' warnings. One day, a sudden noise startled the young dragon. Panicked, it unleashed a jet of fire that consumed the boy's home, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins behind. This tale is still told today as a warning that no man can control the fire of the dragon. As we arrived in the lowlands, we kept a careful eye not only on the skies for an Ignitorus, but also on the ground where plenty of terrestrial predators prowled. While scanning the skies, I didn't even notice the herd of elephants in the distance, until my guide nudged me and pointed them out. Watching them, I noticed a mother and her calf suddenly become panicked as a skull lizard burst from a large burrow in the ground. The subspecies here was much larger than the individuals we had encountered in the Everglades. It lunged towards the calf, but the mother, trumpeting and stomping, struck the lizard's skull-like head with her tusk. The skull lizard, however, was persistent, attempting to move around the mother to reach the calf. Hearing the commotion, the rest of the herd rushed to aid, and faced with so many combatants, the Craniosaurus was forced to retreat. Later that afternoon, we finally observed an Ignitorus hunting. The individual perched on a large branch, seemingly unbothered by a buzzard accompanying it. We watched as it surveyed the savanna before taking flight. Rising high into the sky, we noticed smoke in the distance from a small brush fire. Following it, we saw wildebeest, antelope, and other prey species fleeing the flames. The Ignitorus we followed joined several others circling the burning savanna. This is a common hunting tactic. Using unique chemical reactions and specialized throat sacs, these dragons produce what is essentially a biological flamethrower. They use it to intentionally ignite brush and grass, scaring out prey and funneling them into kill zones. One of the largest fire dragons suddenly dove, striking an antelope injured by the flames with its talons, and then swiftly delivering a killing blow with its toothed jaws. As it and several others fed on charred remains, scavengers began to arrive. While other predators are cautious around these fire-breathing pterosaurs, they have learned that fire often signals food, and some even attempt to challenge Ignitorus for their kills. On the ground, an Ignitorus is far more vulnerable. Something like a hyena's bite could cause serious injury. However, spreading its wings up to 30 feet long, it can appear far larger and more intimidating. And if it still has chemical reserves in its pyroglands, burst of fire is enough to scare off, seriously injure, or even kill most predators. Just as we prepared to leave, the skull lizard that had attacked the elephant calf earlier appeared, drawn by the scent of death. Approaching an Igniporous feeding on a charred wildebeest, the two predators locked eyes. Fearless and hungry, the skull lizard charged to claim the meal. In response, the Igniporous spread its wings and released a jet of fire from its mouth, scorching the lizard's side. Hissing in pain, it slunk low, giving the dragon a wide berth, and went on to scavenge unoccupied remains. Later that evening, as the sun began to dip behind the Drakensberg ridges, the air cooled and shadows stretched long across the plains. For the third time on this expedition, I found myself encountering a storm wyvern. Each sighting had been awe-inspiring, but something about this place seemed especially suited to them. Thunderstorms here are common, rolling in from the mountains and charging the air with electricity. Combined with sheer cliffs for effortless takeoffs and the abundance of large prey in the lowlands, it's no wonder these mountains are frequented by these kings of the skies. From a distant cliff, we watched as a massive wyvern descended, heading for a lone white rhino. A burst of electricity lit up the darkening lowlands, striking the rhino just before the Tricranus sank its massive jaws into it. One of its heads grabbed a rear leg, causing the rhino to topple over, still convulsing from the electrical strike, while the other two heads went for the killing blows. Over the next hour, we watched as the wyvern fed. And then, in a scene that was becoming all too familiar, scavengers cautiously approached in search of a meal. Several small skull lizards and one large individual crept around the Tricranus, looking for an opening to snatch some meat. In an ironic twist, a flock of Igniporous began to circle overhead, now acting as scavengers rather than predators. However, none of them were able to get close. One head fed on the carcass, while the other two kept a careful watch on the surrounding scavengers, occasionally snapping at an Igniporous that flew too near, or letting out a deep croaking growl in warning to a skull lizard. Leaving the sweeping savannas and jagged cliffs of South Africa behind, our journey carries us over 1,500 miles northeast to Madagascar, an island shaped by deep ecological isolation. Cut off from the African mainland for millions of years, it has become a refuge for entire genuses and even families found nowhere else on Earth. Lemurs, tenrecs, and countless other species have persisted here where they could not survive elsewhere. This long-term stability has allowed ancient lineages, some tracing back to the Cretaceous, to endure in ways impossible on the mainland. Among these is a genus that, much like coelacanth, was for a long time thought lost to time, Flora crocodilus. For centuries, this genus was assumed extinct, wiped out during the KPG extinction alongside countless other archosaurs. It wasn't until the late 1800s that a French and English expedition stumbled upon a small population surviving in the remote jungles of Madagascar. This descended lineage is smaller than its ancestors, but otherwise has remained largely unchanged. Arriving on the island, I first sought advice from local guides and villagers on the best places to search. They pointed me along the eastern coast, towards a region where the forest meets swamp and river. I set out, camera and notes at the ready, anticipating hours of patient tracking in the dense foliage. But my journey took an unexpected turn. As I rounded a bend along the coast, I froze. Emerging from the surf, water glistening across its massive body, was a Thermoradiosaurus colossus, or a black marine dragon, the largest terrestrial species on Earth. I hadn't expected to encounter this prehistoric giant till the very last stop of my expedition, yet here was an adult right in front of me. I watched as on all fours it lumbered deliberately into the forest, pushing aside small trees and vegetation with every step. I didn't know what it could possibly be doing in the jungle, but I wasn't about to let the opportunity pass. Maintaining a careful distance, I followed the trail it left in the undergrowth. Above me, lemurs leapt through the branches, alarm calls echoing across the canopy. The forest slowly transitioned into softer marshy ground as I trailed the giant. Here the Thermoradiosaurus came to a stop and leaned down and began to sift around in the muck, dipping its enormous snout into the water and mud. I recognized this behavior immediately from my previous studies. This was a common behavior in the species, where they sift through shallow water to gather irradiated minerals, the key to the extraordinary burning chemical reactions that they can create and shoot from their throat sacs. I was, however, perplexed as to why it was doing it here. This adaptation had previously only been documented in naturally radioactive coastal areas like the Kerala coast, and in one curious case, an individual that had wandered far upriver to Chernobyl. But Madagascar wasn't traditionally known for these natural hotspots, at the very least not this far inland. Perhaps this area had been artificially polluted with irradiated minerals due to the several uranium and thorium mining operations across the island. For hours I watched in awe as it methodically worked through the wetlands, moving with surprising care for its enormous size. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the Thermoradiosaurus turned inland and settled among the trees to rest, its massive body pressing down the grass and mud. It was then that I noticed a peculiar grunting sound. Looking up from my notebook, I was stunned. A Flora crocodilus mother and her baby were foraging quietly nearby, moving through the shallow waters of the wetlands. The mother showed no fear, even as the Thermoradiosaurus raised its head to glance in their direction. The giant seemed to pay them no mind. Perhaps the Florocrocodilus was too small to be deemed a worthy meal. Or perhaps the marine dragon was aware of the highly toxic symbiont plant that grows on their back. In that moment, it became clear why Madagascar has remained a sanctuary for life that would have vanished elsewhere. Among the jungles, rivers, and marshes, evolution's secrets are still quietly preserved, and the Florocrocodilus stands as a testament to survival against the odds, a living link to a past once thought lost forever. Leaving the forest and wetlands of Madagascar behind, our expedition carried us to our final location, across the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia, specifically the coast and jungles of Vietnam. Here the ecosystem teems with giants. Craniosaurus vorax prowl the undergrowth, Thermoradiosaurus colossus roam the coast, Radiogigantus immortalis, the world's largest insect, glides through the canopy, and Colossopithecus rex, the world's largest ape, moves in complex social groups along the forest floor and coastline. Before setting foot in the jungle, I delved into historical accounts of these creatures. One particularly horrifying and astonishing story stuck with me. During the Vietnam War, a US Marine recounted an encounter that seemed almost unbelievable. His squad had been trudging through the dense jungle for weeks. The heat, the humidity, and the relentless insects had tested their endurance, but these proved trivial compared to what awaited them. One night as they set up camp, shadows began moving along the dark forest edges. Hearing the snapping of twigs and subtle movement, the squad initially believed it was Viet Cong soldiers sneaking up on them. But how wrong they were. Peering into the darkness, they barely made out the silhouette of what appeared to be a large skull-like face. And the moment they saw it, it was already too late. A skull lizard, described as being the size of a horse, burst from the jungle, its harpoon-like tongue stabbing into a man's leg and pulling him close before its hooked teeth clamped down. He was dragged screaming into the darkness, firing his weapon wildly as he vanished. A second skull lizard attacked from behind. Their bullets seemed to barely phase it. The Marine described rounds bouncing off of its demonic face. One by one, soldiers were torn apart, their screams swallowed by the jungle. The Marine and the few remaining men found themselves back to back, knowing there was nothing left to do but hold their ground. One of the skull lizards returned, poised to strike again, but then suddenly, a bellowing roar cut through the darkness. A massive humanoid figure emerged from the trees, at least 15 feet tall. One skull lizard lunged towards it, but the creature caught it by the throat with one hand, its jaws snapping and forelimbs clawing uselessly. As another skull lizard charged from the opposite side, the giant drove a massive spear straight through its skull with astonishing strength. It then flung the first skull lizard into a tree and impaled it clean through the chest. Whatever the spear was made of appeared incredibly durable and strong. The giant stared at the surviving men for several seconds, before grabbing one of the bodies by the tail and dragging it into the forest. Whether it acted out of hunger, empathy, or some ancient rivalry with the skull lizards remains unknown. To me, this account clearly describes an encounter with Colossopithecus rex, or more commonly known as the king giant ape. This was the species I sought first in the jungles of Vietnam. I spent days venturing deep into the forest alongside a researcher who had been studying and interacting with a particular Colossopithecus troop for several years. Upon arriving at the site, we emerged from the jungle into a clearing beside a river, and I was stunned by what I saw. The troop appeared to have established a camp of sorts along the riverbank. Beds made from grass and leaves lined the forest edge where they slept, and they even possessed rudimentary bags woven from large banana leaves. But most astonishing of all was a large bioluminescent cocoon made of silk, used to store weapons and tools. I immediately recognized the cocoon as having once belonged to the giant radiant moth, which also inhabits these coastal jungles. The discarded cocoon silk is lightweight, incredibly strong, and largely waterproof, making it ideal for use as a container. The Colossopithecus rex troop recognized the researcher and approached her calmly. Some individuals seemed hesitant toward me at first, but they quickly learned I posed no threat and soon returned to their activities. Some foraged along the river, flipping stones and collecting freshwater clams, snails, and limpets, which they carried in small banana leaf satchels slung over their shoulders. Others moved through the forest, gathering fruits, shoots, and tubers to bring back to the group. The alpha of the group waded into deeper water, using a spear to fish. Witnessing this ingenuity firsthand, I felt compelled to examine their tools more closely. Upon inspection, I found not only spears, but also a hammer, a handheld axe, a small cutting knife, and even a makeshift mortar and pestle, crafted from stone and a mysterious shell that I couldn't identify. The weapons appeared to be made from highly mineralized bioluminescent material. Given their coloration, durability, and structure, I believe they were fashioned from the spines of a Thermoradiosaurus. These were likely gathered after breaking off naturally or recovered from washed-up carcasses. Local stories speak of an ancient rivalry between these apes and the black dragons of the sea, though direct conflicts are likely rare, as Colossopithecus only occasionally visit the coast, while Thermoradiosaurus spend much of their life in the ocean. After camping for several days to continue observing these intelligent giants, I hiked back towards the coastline, hoping to witness one of the most remarkable symbiotic relationships on the planet. Traveling along the shore, I spotted bright orange shapes dotting the beach ahead. Picking up my pace, I was delighted to find a large group of radiant moths crawling along the sand, licking up salts and minerals. These magnificent insects are among the largest in history, with an impressive wingspan nearly twice the height of a man. They are best known for their apparent immortality. When one reaches the end of its lifespan or suffers serious injury, it has been documented constructing a second cocoon. Within it, the moth undergoes a process of breaking down and rebuilding its body, effectively resetting its biological clock and repairing damage to its wings. Scientists have also discovered that this species' wing scales possess powerful healing properties. The scales contain dormant stem-like cells and a dense concentration of regenerative proteins produced during each rebirth cycle. When shed or damaged, these scales release compounds that trigger rapid tissue repair in the moth itself. It is believed that these regenerative scales are shed when the moth crawls around and inside the mouth of a Thermoradiosaurus, helping to heal burns and scarring caused by repeated use of its boiling breath attack. Preliminary studies suggest these wing scales may stimulate cellular regeneration in other organisms as well. With further research, these could have broad medical applications, helping heal wounds, repair damaged tissue, and potentially counteract severe nerve damage and age-related cellular decline. As I observed these creatures, I felt a low booming vibration resonate through my chest. Looking out towards the ocean, I could make out the massive spines of a black marine dragon approaching. I was thrilled at the prospect of witnessing this symbiosis firsthand, but I also understood that the resonating sound was likely a warning. I quickly retreated down the beach and crouched behind a rock, pulling out my camera and zoom lens. As the creature emerged from the surf, I was once again overwhelmed by its sheer size. It lumbered forward on all fours, then paused and looked back. To my astonishment, a much smaller figure followed behind it, like a duckling trailing its parent. It was a juvenile. Though far smaller than the adult, I had no doubt that if I were close, it would still stand nearly eye level with me. The adult turned towards the juvenile, ensuring it was watching, and then demonstrated how to sift through wet sand and mud to collect irradiated minerals. As this occurred, several radiant moths flew in on slow, powerful wing beats, landing on the adult's body. They crawled across its scars, licking minerals and shedding restorative wing scales. After several hours, the adult nudged its offspring onto shore and lay down to rest, opening its mouth wide, not only to cool off, but to allow the moths to enter and continue their work. The juvenile cautiously approached one of the moths, tilting its head in curiosity. The Immortalis responded with a gentle flutter of its wings. For a brief moment, these two vastly different creatures appeared to study one another. The scene left me questioning the boundaries of ecological interaction. How could a creature with such a short lifespan as a moth engage meaningfully with an ancient reptile? Was this simply an exchange, or did it suggest a deeper understanding beyond our perception? Perhaps we will never know, but I am continually surprised and humbled by the majestic, powerful creatures that call this planet home. Thank you all for watching this episode of Creature Archives. This video was made to celebrate the first year of this channel. I am amazed at the growth the channel has had so far, and I am truly grateful for each and every one of you that watches. Also, a big thank you to all of the amazing artists that submitted art for this video. I was blown away by the number of submissions, and I know me and the channel artist Delta Reaper 54 are just overjoyed to see so many people take inspiration from the creatures we have created. Evolve Fiction will continue this year, where I will continue to bring your favorite fictional creatures to life, so be sure to leave down below your suggestions for what you would like to see in the future. I've noticed that our current world unintentionally has a lot of species that live in tropical environments, so I'd like to try to cover more creatures that inhabit other places like temperate and even Arctic regions. Thank you again for everyone who supports the channel, and remember, stay curious, and I'll see you all in the next video.